I'm James Mathers. We're at Cine Gear Expo 2019. I'm here with my good friend Michael Cioni. Michael is a co-founder of Light Iron, and which has now been integrated into the Panavision family, where you hold the title of VP Innovation. That's a big job at Panavision. Tell us about what you're doing there, and what are some of the things you're looking at in the future.
Well, we love focusing on. I'm always thinking about the futures on the fringes, right?
Yeah,
and so
that's why we have you here every year.
I appreciate that. This guy, you can't thank him enough for assembling all these videos and capturing this. Your legacy is incredible for all this data, and we're going to need it because everything that we talk about here, we can go back. And just before we started rolling, we were making
laugh.
comments, and well, we were right. That's what I think this is about. We can go back and we're like, hey, look it, we were right. We called it, But at Panavision, we're able to focus in my department on the horizon line, and this is really important because, I'm not the type of person that wants to focus on the bottom line. I don't let that drive me. The horizon line drives me, and I want to be able to try to focus on that. And one of these things that we're always talking about is resolution, right? And of course, dynamic range and all this stuff. And I had an experience last weekend that is so exciting and it was so unique. And it's something that other people can do as well. And I didn't realize it, but I saw an ad for this new documentary called Apollo 11. And it's a chronicle of the takeoff and landing of the mission to the moon. And I saw it on iTunes, and it was in 4K HDR. I'm like, oh, what a bonus. So I'm going to watch that. I have an LG E7 4K OLED HDR television. And what I didn't know is that this material was shot in 65 millimeter 50 years ago.
Wow.
And scanned in 8K. And I'm watching a picture, and my brain is telling me this is happening right now. But my knowledge knows this is 50 years old. And here we have a precious documentary, which of course is not a commentary at all on resolution and quality and scanning and north light and that stuff. It's not about that. But to me, this is telling me these people made the right decision at the time to shoot the best quality they could. And that film scan never looked better than it does today. Film, because as the display technology improves, it can always go back and be rescanned to be better and better and better. This is not the case with digital formats. Digital formats are locked into what they are. Analog formats do not have those boundaries. This is why it is even more important to understand that shooting hi-fi digitally matters more, because you can't make it higher fi like you can with film. And Apollo 11 is an incredible experience that everyone, if you don't have a 4K TV, go buy one before you watch this and watch it in 4K HDR and call me, because you will have an experience to be like, I can't believe how incredible that looked. It will pull you in when you see life in Florida in 1969 in 65 millimeter 4K HDR. It's just like, it's out of this world, no pun intended. And it is absolutely a testimony to why I think it's odd, but it's a great expression of why I believe so much in high fidelity. And now when people ask me about that, I'm like, you got to watch this thing from 50 years ago, and that'll explain everything I believe. And so I think that's something.
Well, you mentioned HDR. I know you're doing a lot of work in HDR. I was surprised to hear some of the figures you mentioned the other night at the presentation about how fast it's creeping up on us.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad information out there that people think that there's like 8 people with HDR TVs, and it's this carrot that no one will ever really get a hold of. We just recently did a very non-scientific analysis on BestBuy.com. 64 televisions available, 62 of them are 4K HDR. It is almost impossible to get an HD TV anymore. HDR 4K TVs is the standard. Now, in North America, by Christmas 2019, which is about 6 months from now, North America is set to be about 1/3 4K HDR equipped. There are statistics from some of the OTT groups that have boasted that over 130 million subscribers are seeing 130 million transmissions of HDR 4K material each month. So it's very popular there.
And growing.
And growing. But see, the thing that, I talked about looking at the future being on the fringes, what people haven't really realized is that once the mobile device industry hits HDR, which is either 1 or 2 cycles away, that's when tens of millions of people becomes billions of people. The world of SDR technology will die an extremely rapid death. It will not be the slow fade that people might think, or might think the difference from standard def to high def or analog to digital. It was like this slow transition. That is not how it's going to be, period. It will be a rapid fall off because the mobile device industry transmits the signals to billions of people, arguably overnight, and everyone buys phones at a massively faster rate than they buy televisions, right? And so that is where HDR will be in the hands of billions of people by 2022, and that means it will globally replace all SDR in equivalent to an instant, right? It'll happen very, very quickly. Now, that doesn't mean all SDR will be evaporated in totality, but it simply does mean HDR is the absolute standard, and SDR is a substandard. It is a submaster. It's a dub or a copy. It is not your primary master. And so what we focused on at Panavision Light Iron is a project that we've been working on for 2 years, which is a color management hardware and software pipeline we call Link HDR, which takes everything starting with the viewfinder in a DXL camera, which is a HDR Rec 2020 signal, and the viewfinder is the first place you can see anything in a camera. That we've got in HDR, and we take that through Video Village, and we take that through editorial, and then we take that through DI. The same signal that you can see in a viewfinder can be transmitted to the home.
So everybody's seen HDR.
And they're seeing the same HDR. This is critical because cinematographers who say they've had a bad HDR experience or don't like it or are feeling forced by it, I feel bad for them because all those things are probably true. I won't argue that they've had a bad experience or feel pressured by it, but I can't change the statistical analysis that says this is happening whether we like it or not. So how do we capitalize and gain control of it so that we're not slaves to the technology? I know a lot of people are kind of upset that the consumer electronics industry is driving so much of this HDR momentum. And they're like, that seems unfair and backwards. We didn't ask for this. This is a problem that nobody asked for a solution to. However, this is the technique of technological evolution, and unfortunately the consumers did outpace us in this. And I don't know exactly whose fault that is. Maybe a little bit of all of us are culpable. I don't know. But the consumers have outpaced us. Today, the monitor that I have at home is superior to almost every monitor that any cinematographer is using on the set. That's kind of hard to argue with. That's backwards because we shouldn't have the best image in the home and the worst image on the set. Yet that's what's happening. So at Panavision Light Iron, we're trying to build an infrastructure, hardware and software, which is color science and monitoring and mobile technologies that allow us to maintain an HDR proper calibrated signal throughout the entire image chain of custody so that a cinematographer is never entering a DI bay and seeing something for the first time. That is unacceptable. And unfortunately today that's normal. That's going to end with Link HDR. And we're going to make sure that people that participate in our workflow program are going to see the same pictures they expected to see the whole time. And that includes the editor, because an editor is in their chain of custody of the image for sometimes 6 months. We can't have to deprogram anyone or argue with someone what is it supposed to look like through those 6 months. And so this is as much involving the editorial process as it does the set.
And you didn't say workflow once.
Oh, nice. That's good. It's hard to do.
You don't like that word.
I don't like that word.
It's been overused.
So overused. It means too many different things to different people. So, yeah.
Michael has a challenge he wants to put out to everybody.
Yeah, we can call it the Digital Cinema Society Supported Challenge, which is if you can find a better name for the word workflow and it starts to get adopted, prizes will be given. I don't know what they are, but prizes will be given. We need a new word for workflow. I'm trying to use the word pipeline now. No, we don't like pipeline. Chris doesn't like pipeline. So imaging chain of custody, I don't know. We got to get creative. But I'm going to start calling it, applesauce soon or something, because we just got to have something to call it. But everybody knows what we're talking about, and we're just trying to improve that process. And we don't want to have to assume people are referring to something else, because a word just keeps being out there.
Yeah.
So I think that's why even the word HDR, I think I've been recently telling people who, one of their biggest complaints right away is, well, all this brightness and how bright it's got to be and how bright this and bright that. And I said, there's no B in HDR. It's high dynamic range, not bright dynamic range.
Yeah, notice you're calling it high fidelity.
Yeah,
instead
it's
of
high fidelity.
8K or whatever the resolution is.
We want that. And that's
all
why
part of it all works together.
And that's why the Apollo
fidelity.
show is such a great example, because they didn't have pixels, they didn't have sensors, they didn't have HDR monitors, they didn't have any of that. They had the highest phi capturing format of the time, and that is exactly why that footage looks and feels so immersive and good. We should be excited to step up to the bat and do the same thing 50 years later. I mean, we should get excited. A few people are. A few of our customers are actually major advocates for IMAX and 65 mil and giant screen formats. That's awesome, but that is not something that the average person can scale up and we can rent thousands of people, 65 millimeter, 70 millimeter formats. We don't have that infrastructure. Right. So the digital solution puts it in more hands, but we want that digital solution to be as hi-fi as possible, and the consumers have outpaced us. So it's time, for the first time maybe in history, we got to catch up to the consumer, and that's our job.
Well, thanks for helping us catch up.
My pleasure.